For those of you who don't know me, my name is Randall. I'm a teacher here. I teach 4th grade. I've been here in Norway now for 3 years. Prior to being a 4th grade teacher, I worked in the Learning Support Department. And before that, I lived in Monterey, California. How many of you know John Steinbeck? You, John Steinbeck, the author? Okay. So that's kind of his neighborhood. So that's where I grew up. And when I lived in Monterey, California, I was a psychologist, educational psychologist, and sorry, hold on. I think my clicker fast-forwarded on me. There we go. And so I was an educational psychologist for about 7 years, and prior to that, I was a classroom teacher. I taught in elementary school and also in middle school. And so it's a real pleasure for me to be here today to talk to you about grit and how to raise resilient children. Really, the lens of today, though, is not as a psychologist, and it's not as a teacher, it's more so as a parent, because I also have 3 young boys. And so, reading this research, I'm interested as a parent, how can I instill these things in my children? And so when I read the research and when I read the different experts and their opinions, I'm thinking to myself, how can I apply this? How can I blend this into our family dynamic? And so when I present to you today, it's going to be with that type of a lens, and hopefully you can take some of the things away and integrate it into your family dynamic. We're going to talk just a little bit about what grit is, and then we're going to talk about why it's important. So I'll share just some of the research with you, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We won't go too much in detail, but I'll just basically share the kind of the overarching themes and ideas of why everyone's talking about grit now, and why you see it on TED Talks, and why there's so many books out there on grit. One of the other things we'll do is we'll talk about number 2, and yes, the good news is you can teach grit. There are different ideas that you can implement at home and in the school that actually enhance grit. So that's great news. Some of the ideas I'll be talking about are the gift of failure, growth mindset, goal setting, the hard thing rule, family meetings, and then at the end we'll share some resources and we'll take any questions or comments. And also, I don't want to be up here for 45 minutes just talking at you, so we're going to have a lot of little micro minutes where we stop and we discuss and we try to process the information, and that you guys also are experts yourselves, being parents. Just being a parent makes you an expert. And so sharing ideas that maybe you are doing in your home that you feel or are helping your kids to be more resilient and more gritty. So, what is grit? And why is grit important? Essentially, grit is having passion for something and having perseverance. And you put those 2 things together, and research shows that people that have those 2 things have a better chance of succeeding, being successful. And so to illustrate this point, I want to play a little video. It's just 2 minutes. And this is a video I think that's a great introduction for kids. I presented this video to my 4th grade students, and I've also presented this video to my kids. And even my 4-year-old, who's now 5, even my 5-year-old was able to watch this video and take away some information from it. And afterwards at our family meeting, we talked about this video. And I think it really started them on their journey to understanding the principles of grit and behind grit. So.
Why it might just be the key to your success. So what the heck is grit? Well, officially it's the combination of persistence and resilience. Big words, huh? Persistence means you keep going even when the going gets tough, and you stay focused on the task without getting distracted. Resilience is toughness. When you get knocked down, bounce back up and try again. When you have both of these qualities, we call that grit. And once you have grit, you can learn anything. But why is grit so important to learning? Because when things are easy and you're coasting along, it's nice. It might even be fun for a while, but you're not learning. Learning comes from struggle, from trying and failing, then learning from your mistakes. Remember when you first learned to ride a bike, or swim, or play an instrument, or do long division? It seems impossible at first, and if you gave up after the first try, it would be. but you're persistent. You keep trying. You start to get the hang of it. You practice. You work at it a little bit at a time, and eventually it starts to get easier for you. You learn from your mistakes, and the more you work, the easier it gets. But remember, learning is hard work. That's why you need grit. Because the key to success in school and life is how you react when things don't go your way. So the next time you're struggling with something in your life, or in your science book, just remember, it's part of learning. And with a little hard work and a lot of grit, you can do things that once seemed impossible.
So at this point, Professor Duckworth, Angela Duckworth, she was a middle school teacher for many years, and she noticed this kind of concept of grit before she had a name for it. She noticed that many of the students had this perseverance and this resiliency, and those kids did better in her classroom. What she found is it wasn't always the kids that were more intelligent. It wasn't the kids necessarily that had better skill sets. In fact, sometimes she found that it was the kids that struggled that did better. And she was scratching her head thinking, well, why is it then? What are the predictors that make this kid want to do better, that make them so motivated, that make them, even when they get a bad grade, they don't give up. They keep pushing themselves and they keep persevering. And she wanted to figure out more about that concept. So at this point, she went back to get her PhD. And she worked with Martin Seligman, who is kind of a pioneer in the area of resiliency. And it was at this time that she developed the grit scale. So she was thinking of a metric, of a way to measure this concept. So she came up with the grit scale. And the grit scale, if you look at your packets right now, this is the PowerPoint, but if you go to the end of this packet, you'll see there are some sheets of paper, blank white paper, and on there there's some questions. I want you to take a moment and look at this. So there's actually only a few questions, but with this scale, Angela is able to predict success in many different venues, both academic but also athletic. Also looking at cadets at West Point, and a few other areas as well. So what's interesting is when you look at the questions on the scale, it really looks at two things. It looks at individuals' persistence and how hard how hard they're going to try at something, and it looks at their willingness to fail. So it looks at if something happens and they get sidetracked or they have some failure, are they going to give up or are they going to keep trying? So that's the basic construction of this scale. Now, you take this scale and then it gives you an overall rating. The higher you get on the scale, the more gritty you are. So it's a pretty simplistic device. So let's take just a few minutes, and if you could just go through some of the questions and answer them yourselves. And I promise we won't score any of these today. But if you are interested, at the end of my presentation, there are some resources on there. And one of them is Angela's website. And you can go to her website whenever. And you can fill out, there's a grit scale online, and you can fill it out and it'll tell you what your grit score is. Now the good news is, if you do poorly on that, that's okay. Because why? We can build grit, so you can always improve. So, but it is interesting. So just take a few minutes and look at some of the questions and start filling those out if you could. And I think you guys teased out the main elements of the rating scale. And that is not getting distracted, staying focused on your long-term goal, being passionate about something, not seeing failure as a bad thing, seeing failure as a teaching tool, that you can always do better. So that's essentially what grit is. So what I want to do at this point is I want to look at some research. So one of Angela's first research, one of the first pieces of research she did was with middle school students. So she went into a middle school campus and she tested kids using this grit scale. And that's all she used, just a simple grit scale. And then she waited till the end of the year and she looked at the students' GPA. What do you think she found? This is pretty obvious. What do you think she found? The more gritty kids did what?
Higher grades.
They had higher grades. They had better, and then no one was really that surprised with this piece of data. So that's exactly what she found. So on the bottom, you can see these numbers correspond with how much grit the student had. And this is a self-rating. And this is the grade point average. And for those of you not familiar with that, 4.0 would be straight A's. So the more gritty students, or the more grit the student had, the higher their GPA. So this is a direct correlation between these two variables. So then she started thinking some more. Okay, well now this looks at grit and this looks at GPA. I, though, want to look at intelligence and see if that is a factor. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, because I forgot my questions.
Oh, that's okay. Jot them down too if you want to, and we can, yeah? Or we can ask.
We'll do that, whatever
Okay.
works for you.
Okay. So then what she said, you know what I want to do? I want to also throw in IQ and see if that is a predictive variable as well. And what would you think? You would think, yeah, of course it is. IQ? Sure. The more intelligent you are, certainly, you're going to do better on your GPA. She found there was no correlation between IQ and GPA. That's not to say that if you had a high IQ that you didn't have a high GPA, of course. But what she's saying is not a predictor. Just having a high IQ is not a predictor of success. And so she did another study with college students. And she tested their IQs. She gave them the same grit scale. And then she looked at their GPAs. And what she found was very similar data on the grit scale. The more gritty the student was, the higher their GPA, and the more likely they were to graduate from college. Then she looked at IQ. And there was no correlation. IQ did not predict GPA, and it did not predict whether or not that they would graduate. So then she's starting to think, wow, so this is more predictive than IQ. That's interesting. So before, many people were thinking, well, it's really the talent, right? It's what you're born with. You're either a math kid or you're good at basketball and you're just born that way, right? But she's finding out the more that she does this and the more people that she samples and studies, it's actually, no, that's not really true. Not that talent and IQ are bad things. Those are good things. But those aren't predictors of success. It's more about what you do with your talent. That is the predictor of success. So then she went on. She did more studies. She went and she studied the cadets at West Point. Is anyone here familiar with West Point? Someone tell me, what is West Point?
It's a military academy and it would be very highly motivated, successful students.
Yeah? Is it hard to get into West Point? Does anyone know what the criteria is to get into West Point?
It's very difficult to get.
Yeah, you have to have a high GPA, obviously. You have to have good SAT scores. What else? You have to have leadership roles like you do at most universities.
You have to be nominated by a state legislator, right?
You have to be nominated by a senator, the vice president, or the president of the United States. Getting into West Point is not easy. People who get into West Point are very talented, and they work very hard. Okay? So she went to West Point, and she gave the cadets who were just starting out, who were going into their freshman year, this grit scale. They have their own assessment that they do. It's called the whole candidate score. And this looks at all those variables that we just talked about. It looks at their academics. It looks at their physicality. It looks at their leadership skills. It looks at all these multiple variables, and it puts them all together, and it gives an overall candidate score. This score is very useful, and it's a very good score for predicting what type of officer they'll be when they graduate. But it's not a very good predictor of who will drop out. Even though it's very difficult to get into West Point, do you guys guess? Let's take a guess. How many cadets do you think drop out within the first year? 20%. That's a very high rate of people dropping out. So West Point has a vested interest to try to figure out what's going on. They're like, okay, what's going on? These people are really motivated. We do a very thorough screening process. And yet we have all these people who are not making it through, even in their first year. So they want to figure out more about, well, why is that? And what is different about the people who are dropping out versus the people who are not dropping out? And they tried to use this whole candidate score, and what they found is that it just wasn't a very good predictor of who would stay in and who wouldn't stay. So then they asked Angela to come and do her study using this simplistic scale. And this is what they found. They found that, again, the more gritty you were on this scale, and this scale was given before they started the program, that the more likely you were to stay. And students that were less gritty were more likely to leave. And there was a direct correlation between those two things. So again, we're looking at talent versus these other factors, these non-cognitive factors, which are more predictive for success. A couple other studies, I'll just go over these briefly. I won't go into detail. She also looked at teachers in Baltimore. She looked at national spelling bee champions. What she found with teachers, these were new teachers in an inner city in Baltimore, really rough neighborhood. And the dropout rate for new teachers was about 50%. So the school district was like, whoa, this is expensive. This is costing us a lot of money and a lot of talent. People are just leaving in droves. What's going on here? So they wanted to figure out, well, why is it that some teachers stay and some teachers leave? Again, they gave this, this resilience study, this scale, this simple scale. And what they found was a direct correlation with the teachers that stayed and the teachers that left. They did the same thing. She did the same thing with national spelling bee competitors. And what she found is that students that were more gritty, they studied longer hours, and they enrolled themselves in more trials, meaning that they got more feedback. They went to more competitions prior to the big national spelling bee. They didn't mind being wrong. They wanted that feedback. They wanted people to critique them and tell them where they were making their mistakes. And they wanted the challenge. So they went after the challenge. And because of that, the kids that were more gritty for the national spelling bee did better. And their results were better. Now, she also looked at their IQ scores. Was IQ directly correlated with how they did? No, it wasn't. She looked at verbal IQ, because that is associated, right, with your ability to spell. But what she found is that that actually wasn't a very strong predictor. Grit was a better predictor of success. So once again, she's showing that grit is more predictive of success. So what she did at this point, she worked with lots of different teams who have been doing this for many years. So grit is a relatively new concept, but there were older concepts, right? Her mentor, Martin Seligman, also from Penn University, was very instrumental in learned helplessness and the whole resiliency movement. She also worked with the researchers who did the marshmallow test. How many of you have heard the marshmallow test? This is a pretty famous test in psychology. If you've done Psychology 101, you've heard of the marshmallow test. So we've done a lot of data right now, so I just want to decompress a little bit and watch a lighthearted 2-minute clip of kids trying to resist the temptation of eating a marshmallow. This is a great video.
Okay, sit in that chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right.
They're so cute. It's torture.
Oh, don't look at it. Oh, don't touch it. Don't look at it. Oh, so nice.
I'm gonna go do something, and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. Oh, it smells really good.
Oh, 2 minutes then.
So that looked at delayed gratification. A very similar study, the New Zealand study, was done with thousands of kids. And again, that looked at self-control, and those things are kind of linked, right? And they're kind of, the umbrella of resiliency and grit, those are all kind of intertwined. They're a little bit different, but they're kind of intertwined as well. So what these studies did, I'll tell you a little bit about the marshmallow test. They had 4- and 5-year-olds come in and sit down, as you saw. And in the actual study, what they did is they gave them the marshmallow and they put a bell on the table and said, okay, if you want that marshmallow, ring the bell. I'm going to be in the other room. You come back. I'll come back and you can eat it. However, if you wait till I come back, I'll give you 2 marshmallows. And then they left. They were gone for 15 minutes. That's a long time for a 4- and 5-year-old, right? But what they found is that obviously there were different rates of self-control. Some of the kids were able to withstand that temptation and say, okay, well, I'm going to wait because I really want 2 marshmallows. And some kids right away, very impulsively, like, give me that marshmallow, yum, I'm hungry, I want it now, right? So that was an interesting study. But what was more interesting is that this cohort kept coming back in, and they kept doing follow-up studies. A decade later, 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades. Now they're doing studies with those same kids, which was done in the late 1960s. And they're doing studies with those kids looking at functional MRIs and coming up with all kinds of interesting data. But before I get into that, the New Zealand study was not a replication of the marshmallow test, but is very similar. And the findings for both of these was this. If you look at this bar graph here, there's the red and then there's the blue. The red is actually 20% of the people with the highest self-control. And the blue is 20% of the people with the lowest self-control. And you can't read it from back there, but what it says is that the students with the lowest self-control, they were almost 50% likely to have a criminal record. 50%. That's staggering. Looking at children, looking again at the kids with the lack of self-control, children, they were more likely to have children raised in a single-parent household. They were almost 60%. 60%. Looking at at a low annual income, about 30%, a little bit over 30%. Looking at kids with drug issues, problems with drugs, that was about 10%. And looking at multiple health problems, the kids with a lack of self-control, almost 30%. That's frightening. As a parent, I look at that and I think, oh my gosh, I don't want my kid to end up like that. What do I need to do to make my kid have better self-control, right? I mean, all of you are shaking your head saying, yeah, I want to know. So the rest of the talk are just some basic ideas just to get you started. Many of the ideas you probably already do, right? So some of these ideas are well researched, but I'll be honest, the resiliency and more so the grit studies are quite new. And so the research on ways to build that grit are just coming out. But what Angela says is she's a mom too, and she says, hey, look, don't wait. Let's do it now. And in her book, she actually has a lot of suggestions. That's where I got a lot of these ideas, was from her book. So, micro-minute. You guys are experts here. You guys are moms and you're experts. So, right now what I want you to do is think, what are you doing right now in your home that's building grit? Because you are, whether you think it or not. You're doing things right now that build resiliency for your kids. So think for a moment, and then I want you to share with your team, with your group, some ideas, and try to generate maybe 1 or 2 ideas. And then I want to share out as a whole. Let's take a couple minutes and do that, please. So these are some of the things that percolated through as I was reading the research and the various books that I read for this presentation. These are the 4 that, as a parent, I was drawn to, because these are things that I actually can implement within my own home. So these are the things that I'm going to share with you today. There are many other ideas out there, but I hope that you'll find these useful and maybe start incorporating some of these ideas. Again, if you've probably already incorporating some of them already. So the gift of failure, as you can imagine, talks about allowing kids to fail. Right? We saw in the video the kid falling down on his bike. When he started riding his bike, he wasn't very good. That's how life is. When we start something, we're just not, we don't start as an expert. We have to build our skills. And we can't kind of, protect kids from this failure. And when we do that, actually, when we protect kids from failure, we're actually doing them a disservice. We do it from a place of love. I'm the same way. If I see my kids hurting, I want to step in and help them. But sometimes we need to step back, as you guys were saying. Sometimes we need to step away and let them figure it out for themselves. Because this is the learning process. Right? So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this gift of failure. Mindset. How many of you went to the mindset presentation in here, Morning Connections? There was a mindset presentation, so I'm not going to go into too much depth, but I'm going to gloss over a little bit and talk about growth mindset versus fixed mindset and why it's important for building grit. In addition to that, I'm going to talk about goal setting and the hard thing rule. And again, we're talking about perseverance, and that's one of the components of grit, having perseverance to follow things through to the end. And so goal setting is a great way to do that and to build that capacity. And last but not least is the family meetings. And for us, at least, this is a way that we bring everything together. This is a way that we can do all of these things and not go crazy. So starting with the gift of failure. I want you guys to guess who this is. So there's this kid, right, and he loves basketball. He dreams of being an NBA player one day, but he's too short, right? But that doesn't stop him. He keeps playing every day, every morning, every afternoon, right? But still, he goes and he tries out for the high school basketball team and he gets cut. And his coach says, you know, you're just not basketball material. You're just not tall enough. And I'm sorry, you can't play, right? His older brother actually was considered to be more athletic than he was. So he was the one with the talent, so-called talent. But he didn't dissuade him. He didn't give up. He didn't say, okay, you're right, coach. I'm done. Maybe I'll do something else. Maybe I'll be a swimmer or a baseball player. He didn't stop. He redoubled his efforts. And eventually he does make it to the NBA. But in his career, he missed more than 9,000 shots. Could you imagine missing 9,000 shots? That's a lot of failure. He lost over 300 games. And more importantly, picture this stress. In game situations, in game-winning situations, where there was only moments on the clock, maybe 2-3 seconds left, right? They give the ball to him, right? They're down maybe by 1 or 2 points, and they're depending on him to win the game. And 26 times he failed himself and he failed his team. That's a lot of failure. Who is this guy I'm talking about? Does anyone know? He's a basketball player. It's a hint. Does anyone know? Do you guys know who Michael Jordan is?
Yes.
Oh, obviously, right? So Michael Jordan is perhaps one of the greatest basketball players of all time. Phenomenal. But was he born an athlete? Was he born the superstar? No, he was not. His brother had more talent than he did, and yet he's one of the greatest of all time. And what sets him apart? What makes him different? What makes him different is that the grit component. He's what we call a paragon of grit. Right? And what he says is that failure always makes me try harder on the next opportunity. He doesn't see failure as failure. He doesn't see it as a negative thing. He takes failure and uses it to instruct himself. He uses it to feed his motivation. And in fact, his coaches say that after a big game, if he misses that game-winning shot, he'll go out there after the game when everybody else is going home, and he would just shoot for hours, that same shot from that same location, until he was making it. That's the kind of commitment that he had. Even though he was the best on the team, he worked harder than anyone on the team. The next person, there's one other person after this. This gentleman only attended 5 years of school. He went to war when he was a young man as a captain, which is a pretty nice rank. He was demoted to a private. He failed in business. He went bankrupt. Later on, he said, okay, I'm going to be a lawyer. Try my head at that for a while. Didn't do a very good job. He suffered severe depression and anxiety his entire life. And then eventually he had a nervous breakdown. So he decides to go into politics, right? Because that's really good to build your ego. So don't get me started on politics. So he ran for the state legislature and he was defeated. He ran for Congress and he's defeated. He ran for Speaker of the House and he's defeated. He ran for senator 2 times and he was defeated both times. And then he had a candidacy for vice president and he was defeated. And there was a bunch of other defeats up there that he had in politics as well. Who is this paragon of failure? Does anyone know?
President?
Abraham Lincoln. Yeah. And Abraham Lincoln says this: success is going from failure to failure without losing your enthusiasm. That says it all. Right? All that failure, and it didn't dissuade him from his long-term goal. His perseverance never wavered through his entire career. Right? And this is the last person. So, his teacher said that he was too stupid to learn. That's pretty brutal, right? Telling a kid that they don't have the intelligence to learn anything. So this is the message that he was given when he was a kid. He was fired from his first 2 jobs. His bosses said, man, you don't do enough. You're unproductive. So he decided to become an inventor. And his first invention was the automatic electrographic vote recorder. I think someone should have helped him with maybe shortening the name a little bit. But anyways, that was his first invention. And he sunk years into this invention. His heart and soul went into this. And then he took it to Washington, D.C. to make millions of dollars. And what happened? Nobody bought it. They said, what? Come on. No one's going to do this. It's a terrible idea. Go away. Did he say, oh, I'm not going to be an inventor anymore. I'm going to pack up and do something else? No. He kept going. And eventually, he started patenting different inventions. And when he was done with his career, he had over 1,000 patents to his name. Over 1,000, right? But he had a string of failures along the way. He wasn't successful every time. And who is this person? Thomas Edison. And this is what he said. His most famous invention, the light bulb, right? Over 10,000 trials before he got it right. That's a lot of failure. Who in here would do something 10,000 times? I'm sorry, but I don't think I would. That's a lot of failure. That's grit. Now, how can you capture that grit? How can you teach that grit? Sorry, we're out of time. I gotta go. No, I'm just joking. No. So what he said is, I have not failed over 10,000 times, but found 10,000 ways that the light bulb definitely will not work. So again, like his predecessors, he doesn't see this as failure. He sees this as opportunity. Oh, I tried that, didn't work. Great, I can put that down as a column. That doesn't work, I'll try something else. As you saw in the paragons of grit, it was their attitude towards failure. They didn't let failure get them down. They didn't see failure as the end of their journey. They saw it as the beginning or a part of their journey. And even when they hit the big time, they still failed. It's not like they got somewhere and all of a sudden, nope, I'm done with failure now. Now I'm an expert. Now I'm perfect. No, they kept going, right? So even when Michael Jordan was at the top of his game, he still failed. And he still pushed himself and learned from the failure. And that's really the key takeaway in the mindset research from Carol Dweck. And if you want to know more about that, I'll very quickly show you this link. And this has a parent resource page, which is excellent. And we actually use this with our kids. It has videos on there, and it has some activities that you can do as a parent. And you can change it a little bit, modify it a little bit for your family. But it's a great starting point if you want to start to integrate this whole mindset concept of, growth mindset into your family dynamic. So what is mindset? Very briefly, what Carol says is that mindset, there's two kinds of mindset. There's a fixed mindset and there's a growth mindset. A fixed mindset is when you think ability is static. So it's what you're born with, right? So people that think, oh, I'm just smart, I was born that way, that's who I am. Or I'm not a math kid, never been a math kid, never going to be a math kid. Or, you know what, you're too short to play basketball, you know? Well, maybe not, right? So that's a fixed mindset. Whereas the growth mindset people feel that ability, in no matter what arena, can be developed. Whether you're a cadet, whether you're whether you're in your sports, whether it's academics, socialization, any of those things. In fact, I have a really hard time getting up and talking in front of audiences. So for me, my growth mindset is that I always want to develop my skill sets up here in front of an audience. Because being in front of a classroom with kids and being in front of an arena like this in front of adults is very different. So for me, I try to push myself to have a growth mindset that I will continue to develop in my skills presenting in front of people. Right? So that's my personal growth area. So I thought this research is actually very interesting. More interesting is looking at the data, and I'll show you a chart afterwards, but looking at the characteristics of a growth mindset. Those are people that embrace challenge, people that persist with obstacles, people that see effort as necessary, they learn from criticism or mistakes, and they're inspired by other success. What does that sound like to you? Sounds like grit, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Right? So these things are linked. So if you can create a growth mindset in kids, you can start them along this journey of building their grit. And in fact, Carol and Angela now work in unison. They work together. I mean, they're at different universities, but they do a lot of shared research. So very quickly, I want to show you this website. And so you just go to the main website, and then you go to where it says Parents. And then you scroll down. So there's 10 different lessons, and it's 30 minutes for the whole thing. So just kind of go through this at your own leisure later, and you can see that it has videos on what mindset is, reflect on your own beliefs, because guess what? You don't just have growth mindset for everything or fixed mindset for everything. It depends on situations. I still have a fixed mindset for music. I just think I'm not musically inclined. I'm sorry, I do. So I need to work on that because, anyways. So you can have fixed mindset for certain things and growth mindset for certain things. It's not all or nothing, right? But the goal is to build a growth mindset and continue to help your kids to see that they can grow their ability really in anything that they do. So one of the important things that we looked at, or that Carol looked at, is how we respond to kids. And this is very important as a parent and as a teacher. Because 10 years ago, it was in vogue to give kids a lot of praise, right? So we'd go around giving them compliments, saying, well done, good job, you must be smart, you're very intelligent, you're very good at this. But what Carol's found in her research is that there's different kinds of praise. And the way that we praise kids has an impact on their performance. And here's what she found. There's the effort praise, there's control praise, which means nothing, you don't give them any praise. And there's the intelligence praise, where you're saying, wow, you must be smart, you must be really good at this. So what she did is she took a group of kids and she gave them these puzzles to solve, and then she took their score down. And then afterwards, she gave them the feedback, the praise. The kids in the red were told that they were very smart. They said, wow, you did well on that. You're smart. You must be very intelligent. And then the kids in the yellow, they didn't say anything. They said, okay, thanks for taking the test. The kids in green, they were told that you worked really hard on that. You've got great work ethic. You really struggled through, you persevered. Okay, so they really looked at more of an effort praise. And then they gave the test again. And this is what they found. The kids who had the praise for their effort improved the second time, dramatically. Not only that, they enjoyed it. When they asked them, hey, what was that like for you? Oh, it was fun. I thought it was great. And they wanted to be challenged. They said, do you have any harder puzzles? I want to try something a little bit harder. Whereas these kids here, they did worse. Now look at where they were here, though. So it doesn't have to do so much with talent, does it? That's not talent that's predicating their success. It's the feedback that they're receiving. So these kids that were told that they were smart went down, and they had a negative feeling. When they were asked afterwards, did you like that? No, I didn't really like it. It wasn't very fun. So I thought that was very interesting. It has huge implications for now how we respond to our kids. So on that website that I just shared with you, there's an activity in there, because this is hard stuff. You can't just automatically tell yourself, oh, I'm going to start praising effort, because it's very hard to do. So there's a neat activity in there, and you can actually practice writing down different catchphrases. So you can use these catchphrases when you're with your kids. So I highly recommend checking it out. So I'm going to talk a little bit about locus of control, or giving kids independence, basically. And I'm going to be talking about parenting styles, the Norwegian way, family maintenance, and checklists, and then we're done. So I think we might just barely make it. So this study here, I apologize, it's a little small, it's hard to see. This looks at grit versus parenting styles. Okay, and this is for children in primary school. And I forgot to ask, how many of you have kids in primary school? How many in middle? How many in high? Okay, good. Well, this is for primary school, but there's data for middle and for high, and it's very similar. So what they looked at, there's two lines here. There's the empowerment parenting and the traditional parenting. I wish they wouldn't have used that word, because my parents were traditional parents, but I didn't think that they were authoritative. But anyways, it's authoritative parenting is what they mean by that. So it's micromanaging parenting. That's that style. Empowerment parenting is when you communicate effectively with your child. It's when you involve them in the process. You still have structures in place. You still have high expectations. They still have to follow your rules. Okay, so it's not laissez-faire parenting, but it's empowerment parenting where you're more of a coach. Okay, and you're giving them more opportunities to fail, and you're giving them more independence within the parameters that you create. Okay, so that's the difference. Here's what they found. Again, the grit scale down here. Okay, and this is the type of parenting here. So what they found is that with empowerment parenting, the higher you rate yourself as or are rated as a parent with an empowerment kind of attitude, the higher grit scale your kids receive. Whereas the opposite of that, if you're a nitpicker, now let me back up, because we all nitpick as parents, right? Come on. I mean, we all have times in our days where we're very busy, and we maybe later regret what we said, or we're hard on our kids, and we give them a demand, and that's just part of parenting. It's hard to always have this empowerment kind of attitude. Okay, but overall, what they found is that parents who are authoritative, and the more authoritative you are, the less gritty your child. So that's pretty powerful stuff. Okay? We, by our parenting style, can either create grit or we can decrease grit or lessen grit. One of the neat things about being here in Norway that shocked me at first. I don't know what it's like in other states or in other countries, but in California, right, we're a little bit fear avoided. It's different from when I was a kid and I just went out on my bike and hung out with my friends all day long, and we went up in the hills and the mountains and we'd come home for lunch, and you know, we had these endless summers. Nowadays everything is organized. You go from organized sport to organized sport, and you're always with an adult. Everything is organized for you. There's not a lot of independence. And then I come to Norway and I'm biking to work. I'm thinking, wow, this is so neat. I'm biking to work, fantastic. I love it here, it's clean air. And I see these little 4 and 5-year-olds. I'm like, where's the parents? What's going on? And they're all by themselves. And I get to school and I was like, guys, I saw these 4 and 5-year-olds walking by themselves. I'm like, yeah? What? Don't they have parents? Isn't that? And they're like, no, they're fine. They know the way. It's okay. For me, that was very hard to take that in. But the longer I've been here, the more I've seen that. And I've seen it with my own kids, where I'm starting now to be more of a free-range parent, which is just really the Norwegian way. And I've been backing up a lot more and giving my kids more opportunity to go outside for farther and farther distances. Before, I was just, hey, you play in the backyard. Now, I let them go a little bit farther. I'm still not Norwegian, because sometimes I'll hang out with my Norwegian friends and I'm like, what? You let them do what? You let them, they're only 3, you let them cross the street? But, you know, I'm getting there slowly. What I find is the more that I do this, the more independence that I'm instilling in my kids. And I see it. I see their growth. And I see their ability to manage their own behaviors. And it's improving. Because I'm pulling back a little bit. And I'm allowing them to fail. And I'm allowing them to grow their own self-control and regulate their own emotions and figure things out for themselves. So it's been quite a neat experience for me. Now, how many of you have experienced similar things here in Norway? Or have you seen similar things? Is it hard for you guys too? To pull back? Am I the only one? But we're getting there, right? How many of you are a little bit more of a free ranger? Yeah? Starting to? What scares me is when I go home. And I'm thinking, oh man, am I going to be able to do this when I go home? Because I might get arrested if, you know, like if you leave your kid unchaperoned. But anyways, that's another topic. So one of the things is looking at family maintenance. So the locus of control, or building independence, through reading some of the different books. One of the books I really liked was called The Fear of Failure. All of these things, by the way, are written at the end of the presentation. But the fear of failure, one of the ideas was enhancing your family maintenance, aka chores. But the author doesn't call it chores. She's like, it's not a chore. It's their job. It's what they do to contribute to the family. You have this long list of things that you need to do to maintain a family, right? Well, how many of those things can the kids do? Versus how many of those things must you do? And so my wife Randall and I sat down after reading this book, we read it together, and we made a list. And we said, okay, what are some things that we're doing now for the kids that we don't need to be doing, that we could give to them? And it's made our lives a lot easier. One of those things is making lunch in the morning. So now we have these routines, like our morning routines and our afternoon routines, and we've embedded all of these chores, or family maintenance type of tasks, and we're giving more and more to our kids to do. And it's been really great. Now, I will say, it's not perfect. It's not like we say, go make your lunch and we walk away, right? They do still need a little bit of assistance, but they're getting better and better at it. So Raj, he just turned 5, and he's like 80% making his own lunch. And when he has a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, he does it by himself. Now, it's not very clean afterwards. And I'll tell you what, I'm like, just walk away, Will. And you have to force yourself, because it's not, I guarantee you, it's not going to look the way, it's not going to look the same. It's going to look different than what you make for him. Now, obviously, I'm not going to let him put chocolate bars in there or anything like that. I do still manage it. But things like this, whereas before I would have done it myself, or Ranu would have done it herself. And now we're giving them more of these jobs. Arjun now takes out the trash every day. They do their own laundry. We fold it for them, but we give it, and now Arjun's actually starting to fold his own. But they put away their own laundry. They take their dirty clothes down to the laundry room, right? Little things like that that we just don't have to do. Raj gets the mail in the morning, you know? They put out their clothes the night before. I mean, these are things we did before, but so we're adding to the amount of things that they can do independently, and it's been really great. And I have seen definitely a building of independent skills. So one of the ways to manage this, because it's a lot, kids have a hard time remembering everything that you're telling them. So we just made a checklist. And this wasn't our idea. This is an idea, again, that we got from the literature. And this supports, the research supports this. Having some kind of visual representation for kids, it doesn't have to look like this, but some kind of checklist where they have their different duties on there, including their chores or family maintenance, where they can look at that. So you don't have to harp on them and be like, come on, I told you to do this, do this, do this. No, all you need to say is, did you look at your list? Is everything done on your list? It's so much easier for me to say, go look at your list, than for me to harp on them about, go make your lunch, go get dressed, go brush your teeth. So it's just an easier way to manage their behavior, and again, it's building this independent skill. So, we're not going to have time to do this, but I would invite you to do this at home, if you haven't already done this. Make a checklist. You'll be surprised with how many things you do. Or maybe you won't be surprised. But you do a lot. You do a lot. Start writing down everything that you do during the day, with your family, with your kids, in the morning and in the evening. And then take a pencil and circle all the things that you think your kid can do. It would be better to do this with your child next to you. Have your kid sit next to you and say, hey, come on over. Here's the list of things that mom and dad do. You're part of this family, so you need to pick some of these things and empower them to maybe choose some of these items from the list. And then those become now their responsibility. Goal setting. We have about 4 minutes, so I'm actually going to skip over this. And I'm going to go right to the hard thing rule, and then I'm going to end with family meetings, because I want to make sure we cover these last two. So, but very quickly, goal setting. These are just different types of goal settings. And what they're basically saying, it's important that when you make goals, and that has to do with perseverance, and it's that perseverance and the end goal that has to do with building grit, right? So what they're saying is, you create a wish, no matter what it is. You have an outcome. What's the outcome at the end of your wish? What are the obstacles that are in your way? And then what's your plan? Because if you don't have a plan, you're not going to get there. And this is illustrated in the hard thing rule. This is, again, from The Gift of Failure. And again, great book. I really like it. She's a middle school teacher, but she's also a mom. And really, her advice, I got a lot of information from her book, and I found it to be very useful. But the hard thing rule, what she says is, come up with one thing that's difficult for you. And the kids need to come up with their own, and the parents should come up with their own, because you're modeling this for your kid. So for Arjun, that's my son Arjun, he plays soccer with second graders. He's only in first grade. And he complained to me the other day, he goes, oh man, they kick it so much harder than I do, Dad. I want to be able to kick hard like the second graders. And there's only one other first grader on his team. And I said, well, what are you going to do? You know, how are you going to improve? He goes, well, you know, maybe I just practice more. And if I left it at that, what would happen? Nothing would happen, right? He wouldn't persevere, right? He wouldn't come up with a plan on his own, so I have to help him a little bit. So the hard thing rule is, it's something that's difficult for him. It has to be daily, and it has to be consistent. So through just discussion and sitting with Arjun, we went outside the house and we marked a place that he could stand with his soccer ball, and then he kicked it against this wall. And then the first time he kicked it, it hit down here. And I said, okay, make yourself a goal. In 2 weeks, 3 weeks, where do you want to be? He said, well, I want to be up here. There's some nail marks up here. He said, I want to be up here. I said, well, what are you going to do about it? He goes, well, I guess I'll kick it every day. Well, you guess? Well, what do you mean you guess? When? You know, what time? When I get home from school. Okay, how many times? You want to be out here for a minute, 2 minutes? He goes, well, I'll kick it 15 times. That's very specific. It's very specific. Can he do that? Yeah, it's concrete. And kids understand concrete language. And the more concrete you make it, the easier it is for them. So now I just empower him, and I guide him, and I remind him, hey, your hard thing rule, you know, have you done that yet? And he's actually doing it by himself now. So every day he comes home, and he grabs his ball, and he goes out there, and he kicks it. And it's been a week and a half, and he's about to here now. So he's getting really motivated. So we're building this grit by doing things like this, right? The last and final thing I want to talk about is family meetings. Bringing this all together. Does anyone in here do a family meeting? Few people, one person? If you're not doing family meetings, I would highly, highly recommend it. It has to be consistent and it has to be weekly for it to be effective. We do ours on Sunday after we have our morning breakfast. And what we do is we sit down and we have kind of a script. And we've internalized this script. We go over our family rules. We talk about our family maintenance or our chores. We talk about our checklists. We talk about the hard thing rule. Those videos that I showed you, that's when I show those videos to my kids. They're little snippets. And that's when we talk about it. I'm like, hey, what does grit mean to you? Like, is this important? That's when we teach mindset to our kids as well. And it's a very effective way for you to kind of bring all of this together. So that's my talk in a nutshell. If you have any questions, thank you for being a patient audience. I know we went way over. But thank you all for attending today. And I hope there are a few things in here that you can take away and integrate into your family dynamic at home. And on the last page, there's some resources. These are the different books that I read for this talk. I would highly recommend, and they're all interesting, but these two I think would be the most pertinent as a parent. The others are more just research-based and they're interesting. And then these are the websites that we talked about as well. So.
Well, I have no doubt that
Yes.
everybody walked away with some type of takeaway because it was just a wonderful blend of research, takeaways, resources. So thank you for that. That's really good. That's really, really good.
I gotta get back to my students.
Thank you.